This video will show you how to prepare the blackworms for the neurotransmitter lab. The blackworms will be in a container with a paper towel. You'll use a transfer pipette that's been cut so it has a wider mouth and your larger plastic petri dish. Go into the container and gently move the paper towel so that way you can access the worms. The worms like to congregate in groups. Once you find a nice group of worms, press the pipette and suck up the worms into the transfer pipette. Once you have the worms inside the transfer pipette, you can transfer them to your larger dish. You'll need at least 5 worms to be held in this container, so repeat that until you have 5 worms. Once you have the worms, close the lid and return it to its station. The worms in here will be varying shades. Some of them are lighter and darker. The darker points on the worm represent the areas where the worms are more established, and the newer parts are where they've regenerated. So you're looking for worms that are roughly the same color and size when you cut them. We're cutting off the head and the tails of the worms, so that way we're only looking at a section that's autorhythmic of the worm. You have 2 types of slides you're working with. One slide has a depression, a small ring, and the other slide is a completely flat glass slide. This is your workspace, your operating table for the worms. Don't use a scalpel to cut the worm. Instead, use a cover slip. Each station will have a box of cover slips. Separate out 1 cover slip and use a transfer pipette to suck up one of the worms. Here you can see there's 2 worms in this transfer pipette. Simply press out 1 worm onto your slide. Removing the excess water will make it easier for you to chase down your worm. So once you've gotten the excess water out, squeeze out your worm onto the depression slide, or onto the flat slide, excuse me. If you squeeze out more than 1 worm, it's okay. Just wash the other worm into the tray. Now that you have your worm on your slide, use your cover slip to stretch out your worm. If there's more water on the slide, it means that the worm can move around more. If there's less water, again, it will have less places to move. So here you can see the worm moving in response to the touch of the cover slip. I'll place the cover slip on the table. Place the slide on the table. Everyone needs to have their worms be the same length, and for this lab it works best if the length is 1 centimeter. So use your ruler, line it up next to your slide, and then slice off a head and a tail. You slice by pressing firmly with the cover slip, using a second cover slip to pull the worm away from the edge. Once again, repeat the procedure, removing the worm from the edge of the other cover slip. These worms regenerate, so simply place the portion of the worm that you chopped off back into the container where the remaining worms are. Once you have your slide with your worm, transfer the worm gently onto a depression slide. You want to make sure that there's enough water on the slide that it will fill the depression so that when you place the cover slip on the slide, it won't crush the worm. Now you can place one of your cover slips onto the slide containing the worm. This is where you take your baseline reading. So you can see you've got the worm on the cover slip, or on the slide rather, gently placing the cover slip onto the portion of the worm. And now here you can clearly see that there's a segment of a worm on the slide. At this point, you'll bring the slide to the microscope. Once you have your slide prepared with the worm underneath the cover slip, plug in your microscope and make sure the power strip is on. Use the slide stage clips to open and press close the slide on the stage. If you're off center for the stage clips, you can use these dials here to move the microscope stage clips until it is centered with the worm over the light source. Don't leave the light source on too long because you will cook the worm and can upset it. Use the dial on the side of the microscope to adjust the amount of light, and begin with the stage as low as possible and the microscope on the scanning objective. Look through the microscope, raising the stage using the coarse adjustment focus until you start to see the worm come into view. You'll be looking under scanning power only, and then if you want to do more adjustments, you can use the fine focus. Figure out one segment of the worm only to watch, and you'll be looking at the contractions of this segment as it opens and closes. When you're going to count, you can use this counter that you have to count your segments, or by clicking and depressing, and you'll see that the numbers change. If they're moving really slowly, you can just count them out to your partner. Get your baseline and record. As soon as you're done recording, turn down your light source, lower the stage, remove the slide, and place your segment of your worm into its labeled holding chamber, the smaller of the Petri dishes, and use water from your collection tube to wash the worm into its holding pen. This is where it will rest until you're ready to begin all the remaining trials after the worm has been soaked in its designated chemical. This is what you'll see underneath the microscope. You're looking for the contraction of a section of the worm. And so you have one single section of the worm that you might be looking at right here. Okay? And then you're looking for when the sides of that muscle contract. And so if you're looking at this section here, okay, this section, you're looking for the sides of that section to come together. So that would have been a contraction, and then you can see moving down to the next one. If we're looking at the segment at the top of the screen, you see that it shifted. So you need to pay attention to where you're looking at the segment of the worm, and that means adjusting the stage clips.